Hi.
Are we live?
We are live. We're just giving it a minute. There's like a 20-second delay. So folks can just see us now, and then they'll be able to hear this in like 20 seconds. We'll give ourselves a minute. How are you doing?
I'm doing well.
Good. Good. I'm very excited for this. Right. This is great. All right. Well, I think we're good. I think we can get started with our conversation, Dr. Turner. Awesome. Well, first, I just want to welcome folks. Thanks for joining us. We are coming to you live from different locations in Rochester. And today we're going to talk about what does freedom mean. Our practice has been sort of exploring this on our social media channels for the month of July. We have kind of always been, I don't know, always been is right, but we founded the practice in 2013. And then starting in 2016, we made Juneteenth one of our holidays, because most of the folks on our team are people from the Black diaspora. And it just felt like I was getting a lot of input from Black colleagues and friends that, Juneteenth is really like Freedom Day for Black folks, that July 4th really doesn't feel like Freedom Day for Black folks. And so Juneteenth became a holiday. And then as we've gone through sort of like learning more about ourselves and how we want to show up in the world, we just have been really thinking about what does freedom mean. And so this year around, our reflections around Juneteenth, we decided to talk about it more in July because of July 4th. And we've gotten some really interesting feedback. We got a lot of support from refugees helping refugees. So shout out to them. They're amazing. And my good friend, Pam Kim Adams, who I love so much, for really helping us dig into what that means to folks at RHR. And then we decided to do this month's live on what does freedom mean. So with that, I am so happy to welcome you all to our conversation and to welcome my dear friend, Dr. Ruth B. Turner. And Dr. Turner, Ruth, my love, will you introduce yourself for us?
Sure. Thank you so much, my friend, for having me. I want to first just clarify, I'm not a doctor yet.
Okay.
Speaking that into the atmosphere.
Okay.
So I'm Ruth Turner, and I'm not ever quite sure how to introduce myself. But first and foremost, I am married to my best friend for 24 years, have 3 amazing children whom we love dearly. So that is always my first priority. And the first one, I like to identify myself. I'm also an educator and a mental health practitioner. I'm a clinical social worker. So I have always been interested in working with and helping people sort of realize their full potential. Primarily, my work is centered around Black and Brown communities. So when I got this invite to talk about freedom, I was like, wow, we can go so many places with this. And I also currently serve on the New York State Board of Regents, which again just continues my passion to help education become more accessible and hopefully work to provide a quality education for all students. So I think did I forget anything in a nutshell of who I am, I guess?
Yeah, I think that's great. And I'll introduce myself. I'm Aria. Hi. I feel like if you're watching this, you know who I am. My practice is Aria Strategies, and I met Ruth through the work that our practice does, but we quickly became friends. And Ruth is a really important person, mentor, and guide in my life. I also want to mention that Ruth was recently on our podcast. So if you're interested in hearing more about the good work that Ruth does after you watch this video, please do check out Amplify Good wherever you stream your podcast, because Ruth tells us all about her fascinating work and her philosophy. And I will just say that it has guided a lot of the decisions I've made about myself and my practice over the past few years that Ruth and I have had the chance to get closer. So with that, I think we'll just start with, what does freedom mean to you?
Yeah, like I said, when you sent me the information, I've been thinking about it ever since. It's such a huge concept, huge idea. But I thought about something that I heard some years ago, and I'm not exactly sure who said it, but it said something like freedom is the oxygen of the soul. So freedom is being able to fully express who you are, right? All that stuff that makes us who we are, and to be able to have the space and the freedom, the opportunity to do so, I think is the essence of freedom, right? Without restrictions, without boundaries. Just the ability to have the full expression of who we are as we are, right? Not as people want us to be or society thinks we should be. And unfortunately, if I'm really to adhere to that definition, I don't think freedom is extended to many of us. That's it.
Yeah, so I'm hoping that, full disclosure, when I asked Ruth to do this, I was like, I want to talk about freedom with somebody, and Ruth is really fun to talk with things about. But then as I got thinking more about it, it became way less general in my mind and pretty specific to Ruth's background and experiences. And so I'm hoping that you'll talk a little bit about that, Ruth, because what Ruth didn't share in her introduction is that she was born on the continent of Africa and has a really interesting, sad, compelling, joyful story related to her family's ancestral homeland. And so I'm hoping you'll walk us through that, because that ties directly to like this conversation around freedom and what does it mean and what does it mean in different contexts. And so I'm hoping that you'll talk a little bit about that. Will you kind of talk us through that?
Absolutely. Yes,
Thanks.
you're right. Like I said, I never know like when production what aspect of my life or who I am to express. But yes, so I was born in a small country that most people have never heard of in my experience. It's a beautiful place called Eritrea, right in East Africa, in the Horn of Africa. And I lived there up until I was about 6 or 7, when my family, we actually had to flee our homeland due to a 30, well, not at that point, it was 30 years, but it ended up being about a 30-year war, that took place there and fled our homeland. But to backtrack a little bit, my father and grandfather and most of the folks in my family up to that point were freedom fighters. My dad was one who led what we call the Eritrea Liberation Front movement and was successful in freeing prisoners of war, against the other country in which we were engaged in war. So this concept of being a freedom fighter is in my bloodline. And I always tell my kids, it's part of who we are, right? That whenever there's freedom that is denied, it is just within us, right? To ensure or work towards ensuring that freedom exists for all people. So it was really difficult time, as I said. There was, as in most countries during such a long war, there's poverty, there's just trauma that goes on, schooling is interrupted, life as we know it is interrupted. And oftentimes when people would see those images, I guess Americans, because I was not aware of it when I was younger, would see those images of some places in the continent of Africa, they would have this idea this is how Africa is and has always been, right? But
Mm.
again, it was oftentimes due to ongoing war and so forth. So, as I said, my father and grandfather were freedom fighters, really instilled in us ancestral pride, right? We were never, ever ashamed of where we came from. It has always been a source of great pride for us to be a part of such resilient and strong people who very much died, right, to protect their heritage and their freedom and allowed us to be who we are today. So that's something that I've shared that history with my children and hope one day soon to take them back home so they can actually see the beautiful land in which, their mother is from. And I think they've also, even though it's been historical accounts, hearing it from extended families and myself, I believe my kids have also adapted, that idea of social justice and the fact that even though we live in the United States of America, right, we still be freedom fighters. So there's so many freedoms and rights that are denied to so many. So I think that their father and I did a great job of instilling that responsibility uh, uh, onto them, right, and continue that legacy of the freedom fighters. Hopefully one day, I'm not sure if that'll happen in my lifetime, we will no longer need to be freedom fighters, but we'll see.
Yeah, I've again, I always feel weird when I like talk about myself or whatever, because I feel like if you're here, you kind of already like know about me or whatever. But like I was born in the US, like my parents were born in the US, my grandparents were born in the US, right? My great grandparents weren't born in the US. That was like, so that's like the closest to going back to like that immigrant experience or whatever, which is not very not very close. But I did have family like leave where they lived because like they just couldn't, like they couldn't self-actualize where they were, right? And especially like the Jewish side of my mom's family had to leave Galicia because it was like, if you were a Jew in that part of the world, lots of parts of the world, that there's this like Galicia was like, maybe it was Austria, maybe it was Hungary, maybe it was Poland. But you couldn't, like, you didn't know if you're going to be a citizen like one day to the next or whatever. And so it just, it was like a different kind of freedom that they needed. And other folks, it was more casual. It was like you could be white anywhere kind of thing. And so I wonder, like, I grapple with this a lot, right? Because freedom is something that's super important to me. But other than being a woman, with a uterus and people trying to control what I do with my body, I haven't struggled a lot with my own freedom stuff, right? That it's been a pretty easy go for me. Um and so I wonder how do you envision like all of us kind of like pulling in the same direction? Like what does that look like? Like somebody who like literally, like, you tell your kids like you have the blood of warriors in you, right? Like, which is like, that's real. Like that's so real. And I'm thinking of shout out to my friend Maureen. A few years ago we went out to the Little and we saw the MIA uh documentary, and her dad was a freedom fighter, a Tamil freedom fighter, and just like knowing that there are these like really explicit, like dramatic experiences around what does it mean to like get freedom and do freedom, and then there's experiences like mine, right, that are like my life is pretty easy, and I tell people my life is like only slightly harder than the Queen of England's, right? So like how do we get everybody on the same page and pulling in the same direction? Do you have like thoughts and feelings on that?
I mean, if I had the answers to that, I would be very, very, very rich. We would have world peace. I'm sure of it. I think first and foremost, I think that's a difficult challenge because we're socialized differently, right?
Yeah.
So, coming to this country when I was a very young child, I remember my classmates would, have this idea of people from Africa that I just never understood. Like it didn't resonate with me. Like I don't know where you get that from, right? And it was never something for us to be ashamed of. So we were almost led to believe like we should be ashamed to be African. It comes from the continent
But
of Africa.
did you see the commercials when you were a kid of like super like colonial, super like steeped in white supremacy culture, like white helper culture of like the I feel like you might have talked about this in the podcast, but I know you and I have talked about this, that like the image of like an African child with like the rice like stuck to their face and
Right.
like and you're like, that's not
Right.
that
And if that exists, it would exist in almost any country that is devastated by war. Right.
right.
And we see that even in European countries. So,
Right.
having that understanding that, prolonged war causes a lot of infrastructural, poverty and many other things that come with it. But I never understood it. And, I don't want to, I think I shared with you some of the names that, we were called that just did not make any sense to me. I didn't see any connection to who I was and who we are as a people. And I can remember like taking food to school that was cultural food because we just did not have the appetite for American food, much less cafeteria food. And I remember one time, telling my mother like I did not want to do that anymore. She's like, well, how come? You love this food. And I made a lot of excuses. Finally, I told her the truth because the other kids were making fun of me and spoken like a true European mother because you know who you are, and I was kind of like, who am I, and to literally like shake me into this again, this heritage pride. And I was like, yes, you're absolutely right. And I was able to, I didn't care if the kids said, why does that smell like that? Why are you eating that? But there was a part of me that was beginning, right, after all the misunderstandings, like to sort of feel some sort of shame about it and to assimilate and try to eat what they were eating, even though I really did not at all enjoy it. And it took her to kind of remind me, like, no, right? You will not pay attention to that. You're going to hold your head up high. But then I think also, after a while, you get that consistent message year after year, day after day, generation after generation, right?
Mm-hmm.
That weighs on a group of people. So even though sometimes people say, well, you have physical freedom, right? You are no longer, restricted or held prisoner, right? But there's so many, it's not just that simple, right? There is not the same, as you mentioned, we don't have the same level of freedom, right? So Aria, although we're very good friends, you can go places
Right.
anywhere in the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that happens about your safety simply because you're a white woman. Might be some areas because you're a woman, right? But otherwise, very well limited. Where even in the United States, whereas for me, right, I have to kind of like prepare myself to go to certain areas, recognizing that I'm not necessarily welcome. And so forth. So I don't have the same level of freedom of expression of who I am, right? It's the other process is who I am without consequences, as you do as a white woman. So even beyond, being able to recognize that now that I was in the United States and had grown up and had gone through the school system, spent all majority of my life, in the United States since I was about 7 years old, was now beginning to see a different level of social justice fight than I did back home, right? Mm-hmm. So back home, the fight was we will remain independent, right? Mm-hmm. We will hold on to our cultural heritage. We're not going to allow any country, right, to overtake us. And then to come to the United States was like, oh, we still have to fight for freedom here too, right? Even though it's the land of the free and the land of the brave, you can come here and be whoever you want, right? Live the American dream. But the reality of it was that dream was not extended the same way to everybody. And I think it's so ingrained and institutional, that's a whole different level of freedom fighters that are necessary in this concept of, being free, even Dr. King said, free at last, right? What does that mean to truly be free at last?
Yeah. Yeah, so much of what you just said sparks curiosity in me. So I mean, we can just talk about like my experience and your experience. You said like I'm a white woman, so like I can run my mouth, and I frequently do, with no consequences, or like I might annoy somebody or make somebody angry, but like no physical violence. I won't get fired. I mean, I own my own practice, but like frequently people hire us because of how outspoken I am around some specific things. So that it's a benefit that I'm, I run my mouth or I'm outspoken. Um, and just walking down the street, I'm not I'm not a target. I read as like a cis woman, so that that is like I'm like the I don't know, I've been grappling with this a lot, like that we like default against whiteness, and that I fall into the default. So I'm easy to not pay attention to or target. And then if we think about like your experiences, it's like almost 180 degrees different, right? Because you are outspoken, but you risk a lot when you're outspoken, like at like an order of magnitude more than what I risk. And then in physical safety, I think about this all the time. I think about the physical safety of people who have melanin, essentially, and women with melanin. And if you don't, I think a lot about our like trans siblings who don't don't fit any of the default, right? Like and how um just how like fragile that existence is, because it our trans siblings of color live at the intersection of every target point, essentially. And so I don't know, like how do you find freedom in that? Like how, like where does the freedom live in knowing that that's the world hasn't caught up with the inherent worth and dignity of all people? And so where do you like, where does the freedom live in that? And where are the push points, the levers?
Oh, that's a really good question. Um, I think in some instances, you recognize, right, the lack of freedom that afforded to others, but not to yourself, right?
Mm.
And I think it was James Baldwin who said, Black in America, right, and conscious is in a constant state of rage.
Yeah.
When we see, when we see the protests and we see, you know what I mean,
Mm-hmm.
the actions that take place, sometimes um, structure that might follow, right? It's because it's the voice of the unheard, right? There is only so much individual and people can take, year after year, same thing happening. So I think you either can sit back and accept it and say, well, this is how society is. So just, go places you feel safe, and accept it. Avoid places you don't belong there, accept the fact that you have to code switch, you know what I mean, be a different person in workspaces because who you are is unprofessional, right? How you look is unprofessional. So, that's one way, right? It's just how it is. I'm going to accept it. Or the other part is, you know what? No, it's not right, right? And I'm going to continue in my sphere of influence, fight against that, right?
Yeah.
Or tap out and say, I'm just going to do my own thing, right? I'm not going to go work in these white spaces that want me to look and sound, like they do, and have no appreciation of the diversity, the value that I bring of who I am. So it's exhausting. I want to be very clear about that. It's exhausting to constantly, right, have to think about, okay, am I going to go somewhere and are they going to have the product that I need for my hair, right? You never have to worry about that, Aria. Even in Black communities, they will always have,
Right.
you know what I mean, what you need, right? And can I live in this community, right? And be a true minority, be the only Black person And will I be accepted? Chances are, no, you're not. And that's just the reality. But white people can essentially live anywhere,
Mm-hmm.
right? Whether it's the city, whether it's the suburbs, right? And have a level of comfort and safety. So, what does that do to the psyche? I'm always saying, like, I'm always mindful, like, what is that doing to my children, right? I'm more of an adult, right? But it does have trauma, racial trauma, and impact even as an adult, but
Mm-hmm.
more so of a child, as I think about. I worked with young people, and I still do for a long time. It's this idea of what are those messages, right, are saying, right? When Black girls are treated differently, right, in dress code or adultified, at a very
Mm-hmm.
young age, with white girls do not have to experience where some things is perceived as being ghetto and acceptable when Black girls are putting purple hair, blue hair, but as soon as white girls and white women do it, now is the thing that's in, that's chic, that's elegant, whatever.
Right.
So those double standards that we see so much, right? And then the gaslighting, like, oh, why you're so angry, you know what I mean? There's no real thing as racism, we're colorblind. Don't you feel these interracial couples? And we've had our first Black president, all that stuff that for yourself has not brought to fruition the
Right.
level of freedom that we are entitled to as human beings, just like our white counterparts, right? So that is the constant thing, like, you know what I mean? What do we do about that, right? And sometimes there's a sense like, will it ever change? Be honest about it, you know what I mean? Will
Mm-hmm.
it ever change? When I think back, to those individuals grown up in the 50s and 60s, well, not too long ago, our community was like the 50s and 60s. We're out there protesting for freedom, protesting for police officers not to kill Black and brown people. That's insane.
Oh, I was like, I'm, I feel like it's 1964 again here. Like, and I wasn't alive in 1964. Like, I, I felt like all those things, right? Like, I felt like if you're one of those people who says like, well, if I lived in like the 1930s in Germany, like I would stand up against fascism, and if I lived in the 1950s and 60s, I would be on the front line. And I looked around and I didn't see any of those people saying that stuff. I saw all these other people, and I was like, this is like anti-fascism. This is like, we're literally like in the same space, like of like the just the harm of existing, because in 50 years, 60 years, we are not there, and we're not that far away from where we were. um
And
and
the,
I'm
and the rules of
thinking
the games are constantly changing.
the rules
You
of
know,
the game, is that what you said? The rules of the game are
the rules of
constantly
the games
changing.
are constantly changing. So if there's an increase in Black voter turnout, let's change the rules,
Yes.
right? Let's make it more difficult, not because Black and brown people are voting, but because you don't want to prevent voter fraud, right? So again,
Gaslighting.
yes, and
Yeah.
when you are attempting to make progress, right, and the rules get changed. Um, so that in itself is extremely frustrating, and I think it's really important to also underscore the responsibility of white people,
Mm-hmm.
right, as freedom fighters, because again, Black and brown people did not create this system. And I know many people will be out there and say, well, I've only been born for 50 years. I didn't create it. No, but you benefit from it, right?
Right.
Um, so I also don't want to minimize that, right? How important that is. And part of the success of the civil rights movement was there were some white people sitting there who saw, the what was taking place and decided, what, I in good conscience, as a human being, I have to do something about that. So
Right.
I think it's really important for white people to engage in that freedom fighting work, right? Because they have a responsibility. This is the system their ancestors have pretty much set them up for.
Yeah, so I want to linger on this a little bit. I think about this a lot, for lots of reasons, right? I just want to kind of sit with it for a couple minutes. But so like I said, like my great grandparents, most of my family came to the United States between like the 1880s and 1920s. But I do have some like far back on one of my mom's sides, and far back on my dad's side, um some like original settler colonial people in Quebec and in Massachusetts, right? So like I'm like far back to like the Mayflower crowd, right? And then far back to the uh what are they called? The field de Roy. It means like daughters of the king or whatever. It's when essentially the king of France sent like orphaned women who didn't necessarily have a positive future in France. He like sent them to Quebec to marry like the trappers and I don't know. It was like it's shady, but also like there's this weird pride in like Quebec around this group of women. I don't know. So anyway, so far back. So lately I've been grappling with like so also folks who like know me know I'm a trained historian, right? Like my master's degree is in history museum studies, shout out Cooperstown graduate program. But also that like I've recently like been reinvigorated by some like family genealogy work I've been doing, and one of the reasons I did that was because I really wanted to know if my family owned other people. Like that was really important to me to know, right? Because like obviously like I was born in the late 70s. Like I don't I'm not like responsible for what they did, but like you said, like I benefit from all the things, right? And um so it has been like interesting. What I learned was that like my Jewish family lived in Harlem, and my great granddad was a trained jazz musician, and like was so like I felt like this like affinity, like oh maybe it's like African Americans and American Jews have had these like long-standing relationships for many decades, and maybe it's like genetic that I like love the culture, like I'm here for the culture or whatever. But then I've been having these really thinking a lot about my family's direct impact on Indigenous communities, and what does like freedom mean in the Indigenous community. And I do have a couple of close Indigenous friends who I really appreciate and rely on for their, their reflections and feedback and stuff. But really, this is like a me thing, grappling that like um, nothing I do or say can change what my ancestors did. And every day I wake up knowing that I live on stolen land. My house in the city is on stolen land. My 40 acres in the Adirondacks is on stolen land. Stolen land adjacent to the St. Regis Mohawk Reservation. Like I know whose land that is specifically, right? I see those families regularly when I'm up at my cabin. So knowing that like I continue to benefit from this, and then where does that put me in this fight for liberation, right? And I don't have an answer, but I know that it's like a constant refrain in my life, that trying to determine what it is, what do I do to make amends and repair the harm that happened hundreds of years ago but has a legacy today. And so I don't know, I wonder what, like how does that fit into the Black experience specifically? Because I know like you have this very close tie to Eritrea, but like your husband, his family has been here for generations. And so your kids,
40 acres and a mule.
yeah. So like your kids have this like what feels to me like a truly American experience. And as much as like they have ties to chattel slavery, to the harm caused by chattel slavery, they also have really close ties to the immigrant experience, and what that is like in the near term, that most most Americans have ties to the immigrant experience, but it's not like I was talking about, like it's not close. Like my great granddad died the year I was born. You know what I mean? Like I've never like talked to them about that or whatever. So thinking about what Like, what does that mean? What does that mean for like generations of those messages that you were talking about? And and I do kind of want you to talk more about like how white folks can can move the needle, have moved the needle. You talked a little bit about like um white folks during the civil rights um era in like the 50s and 60s. I don't know, I'm interested in sort of like exploring that more. What how do we how do we get to freedom after generations of oppression?
And I mean, I think you said something that was so profound too about this idea of recognizing, right, as a white woman, the land in which, you know, we occupy, right, and feeling like, how do we make amends, right? Number one, I think a great place to start for the United States, if everything about that is, there has never been a really formal apology or recognition for chattel slavery, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's a great place to start. To take responsibility, right, and say, we recognize, you know, as a country, this is the harm that we've done, and we're in 2021, and that still hasn't happened, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which we wonder why. So I think that's definitely a place to start. And then also, although, you know, we can't necessarily, I know people would not be willing to kind of say, you know what, this is not my land, so I give it back, right? I recognize I'm not going to do that, but I think there are ways, right, as a country, not individual, right? Because again, it was an institutional act. Is to make a mess. We talk about the promise of 48 of New York.
Mm-hmm.
Provide free education and training for folks that have been impacted, right, by that free labor of causing people to be enslaved, right, to build this country. So if we really care to, there are meaningful things that we can do, right? Again, you can't erase the past, right? You can't erase the pain and the enduring legacy of slavery, right? The loss of identity, the loss to attachment to a land, to a people that is so essential to our to individuals' identity, right? But there are some things that we can begin to do, right, to help generations that are still impacted by active slavery, right? Although it happens, right, there is still the impact that we're feeling of that, the devastation that's taking place. So I think white people could lead that and make a demand of that, right?
Yeah.
Like there's white people who make laws, and all of a sudden there's laws passed. You know, and I'm glad. You know, I think not too long ago, I think New York State passed that anti-Asian hate discrimination.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, we absolutely should do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we also should apologize and recognize anti-blackness,
Right.
right? That there are anti-blackness rhetoric and policies, right, that impact Black people, and we've not done that yet. So I want to be very clear that yes, there are many people that are oppressed who are denied freedom, but I'll be very clear, none like Black people, and it's global.
Yeah.
Right? Global. I go to Italy, and I'm going to get anti-Black, you know, I mean, rhetoric and anti-Black treatment. So I want to be very, very clear about that. And I've had, you know, especially adolescents and teenagers and children say, why does the world treat Black people so much? Right? What is it about Black people so much? So that's a question that I think about a lot, and I think it lies in who we are, not who we were. You know what I mean? First ones to civilization as we know it, right? Advancements in math and science, that's all Black people.
Right.
So I think there's this large conspiracy, right, to destroy a group of people. You only do that if there's a level of value and threat that you would so intentionally, generation after generation, you know, inflict that level of pain on a group of people. So as people of color, we owe it to our children to really teach them. We can't wait for schools to do it. Schools should have responsibility to teach history as it is, but we also as a people have to teach our children, right, their full history. It did not start as slavery.
Right.
It started centuries before slavery. And once a group of people know who they are, there's a sense of power that comes from that. So I think in seeking freedom and fighting for freedom, we also have to make sure that our children know, right, their full legacy, their full ancestral background, so that they can really self-accurate, like you said, and see who they really are, not what the world or the media is trying to get them to, right? You're a thug, you're a threat. No, you're not. You come from a intellectual group of people that have greatly, right, contributed not to the United States, to the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think on that note, I mean, that's sort of where I want to land is like, it's all our responsibility, and it's our responsibility to tell the truth about it and to grapple with the truth about it. And I think that's how we get to freedom, is we tell the truth and we grapple with that truth. Um, before we say our goodbyes today, I want to shout out one of my other friends and mentors, a freedom fighter here in Rochester, New York, who is really going through it in the town of Brighton. I want to shout out Robin Reynolds Wilt for standing alongside other oppressed people and being a person of integrity and honesty, and holding up what's important. And that is that we know the truth, we grapple with the truth, and then we repair the harm of the truth. So thanks, Robin, for all you do. We appreciate you a lot. And my dear friend Ruth, oh, how I love you. Thank you so much for being with me today. And thank you so much for sharing all your wisdom with us. If you have questions for Ruth or for me, you can email us at hello@ariastrategiesllc.com. You can also message us on our Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Twitter channels. And you can submit a comment on our website, ariastrategiesllc.com. So keep the conversation going, learn what's up, grapple with what's up, and then let's make the changes we need to make so everybody can get to freedom. Ruth, thank you. I love you. And I will talk to you soon, my friend. Mwah. Bye, everybody. Thank you.